Mexico, a nation of 130 million people, has long been a powerhouse in the world of boxing. Over the course of the sport's history, the country has produced an extraordinary number of world boxing champions, ranking only second to the United States. This is not a coincidence or by chance. This is a result of the history, the culture, and environment coming together as an ideal breeding ground for producing boxers who are known for their toughness and aggression. Mexico and its fans are so important to the world of boxing that they have even altered the boxing calendar. In the past, in the United States, important fights would always take place on days like the 4th of July. Now, the weekends of Cinco de Mayo and September 16th, Mexico's Independence Day, mark boxing's two most important events of the year. A tradition which started with Julio Cesar Chavez and is carried on with the career of Canelo Alvarez, one of the highest paid boxers in the world today. So today we're going to uncover why Mexico historically has produced so many world boxing champions. Long before modern boxing existed, indigenous peoples of Mexico practiced ritualistic forms of combat. The Aztecs, Maya, and other civilizations had elaborate fighting ceremonies that tested both a warrior's courage and skill. But boxing as we know it today really began to emerge in the 1800s in England. It was known as prize fighting, and it was in a gray area between being a sport and a spectacle. Much of polite society viewed it as a disreputable pastime. Bare-knuckle boxing was one of the earliest forms of this, and the fights were often brutal and unregulated, where contests could last dozens of rounds and only ended when a fighter could no longer stand. The bare-knuckle boxing fights were so violent that it built a perception of being too barbaric to be considered a sport. When prize fighting began to evolve with the adoption of gloves and the Marquis of Queensberry rules, it gave boxing much more structure, the rounds and referees that we're familiar with today, but it still wasn't fully accepted by the public. Many still saw boxing as immoral and associated with gambling, drinking, and the criminal underworld. It would eventually be outlawed in England and in the United States, forcing bouts underground. It would take decades of reform, regulation, and the gradual acceptance of gloved competition before boxing was transformed from something that was associated with criminals to an officially recognized sport. In the United States especially, authorities cracked down on prize fighting. Promoters began pushing the sport west and southwards in search of looser regulations and more receptive audiences. This migration carried boxing into the US-Mexico borderlands, where the sparse legal oversight made it easier to stage bouts. Early photographs capture striking images of prize fights held in the open desert, with crowds gathering on either side of the Rio Grande to watch men battle it out under the sun. From these frontier contests, the sport slowly took root in Mexico. What began as an imported spectacle tied to gambling and traveling fight promoters soon blended with local traditions. In border towns, boxing became both entertainment and opportunity for young men. This Borderland introduction laid the foundation for boxing's expansion into Mexico's interior, where it would grow into one of the nation's most celebrated sports. But it was during and after the Mexican Revolution that the sport truly flourished. In the 1920s, the government promoted sports and athletics. Boxing was the most important among them as a symbol of national stability and progress. Mexico City's Frontón Nacional hosted major fights, often featuring foreign fighters from the US. And these events helped establish gyms and governing bodies that nurtured homegrown Mexican talent. One of the most important was Luis Villanueva Páramo, better known as Kid Azteca. He's often credited with popularizing the signature Mexican liver punch. Even a century later, the liver shot is still one of the most characteristic punches you'll see thrown by Mexican fighters. Most early Mexican fighters came from working class backgrounds. From poverty, hardship, They had limited opportunities, and that shaped these young men into fierce competitors. For many of them, boxing was a way to earn money, provide for their families, and earn respect within their communities. Cultural values also played a role. The tradition of machismo, an emphasis on bravery and proving one's manhood, gave Mexican boxers a spirit of unrelenting toughness. Fighters were expected to absorb punishment, keep pressing forward, and never surrender, qualities that became as important to their reputations as their victories. In the ring, this translated into the distinctive style that they are known for today: aggression, relentlessness, pressure, paying little attention to defense, and a refusal to quit. For boxing fans, this was an electric and exciting fighting style, and for promoters, it was gold. Mexican fighters guaranteed excitement. It would later lead to them being part of bouts that sold out arenas in major cards like Las Vegas and Los Angeles. Mexico's physical environment also played a role in shaping its fighters. Much of the country sits at a high altitude. Mexico City itself towers over 7,000 feet above sea level. Training and living in such thin air forces the lungs and heart to work harder, naturally building endurance. When Mexican fighters traveled abroad, their conditioning often gave them an edge in stamina, allowing them to keep pressing forward long after their opponents began to fade. By the 1960s, waves of migration from Mexico into the United States created large Mexican-American communities, and with them came an insatiable appetite for boxing. Arenas in California became as important as those in Mexico City, hosting some of the fiercest rivalries and introducing the Mexican style to a broader global audience. It was during this time that Julio Cesar Chavez emerged. Born in 1962 in Sonora, he grew up in an abandoned railroad car with his family and turned to boxing to lift himself and his family out of poverty. In the ring, Chavez became the purest embodiment of the Mexican style. Relentless pressure, always moving forward, punishing body shots, especially his devastating left hook to the liver, and an unbreakable chin that made him nearly impossible to stop. Between his debut in 1980 and his first professional loss in 1994, he went on an astonishing 89-win streak, one of the longest unbeaten streaks in boxing history, and he became a national hero for millions of Mexicans at home and abroad. By the peak of his career, he was considered not just Mexico's greatest fighter, but one of the greatest in the history of the sport. Chavez inspired generations of Mexican boxers, and with him grew a tradition of fans waving flags, singing in Spanish, and dressing in the Mexican national colors. A tradition that carried on today with Canelo Alvarez. For Mexican fans, whether ringside or watching from home, the idea that boxing is dead doesn't ring true. What started as an English tradition, passed on to their cousins in the US, boxing today finds its strongest heartbeat in Mexico and across Latin America. Thank you for watching. If you liked that video, don't forget to hit subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.